Thanks everybody for coming. I work at the Duke University Center for International and Global Studies, who is in part supporting this event today, the program. In 1997, through a grant from the Ford Foundation, the Center for International Studies, now International and Global Studies, initiated the Graduate Working Groups on Global Issues. A program intended to support interdisciplinary groups, each comprised of students from an array of graduate programs and professional schools. When the Ford grant expired a few years later, DUCIGS made the decision to continue this programming. What was initially support for 3 or 4 interdisciplinary groups has now grown to sponsorship of 11 groups in the 2018-2019 academic year. This year, we are partnering with Africa Initiative again and Global Asia Initiative in sponsorship of 4 of the groups, 2 of which are represented here today. The working groups meet several times each semester to discuss, and sometimes almost on a weekly basis, to discuss a wide range of topics with a global focus, and for participants to share their individual research, which has become a really valuable option for them. Among other additional diverse activities, the groups plan mini conferences, they create publications, and sponsor symposia throughout the year. We've invited representatives from 5 of those groups now to tell you what they've been involved in during the current academic year. I would like to introduce them. Starting at the far end, we have from Challenges in International Development, Luke Fesco and Renee Jabri. Luke is a 3rd-year PhD candidate in economics from Cleveland, Ohio. I ask each one of them when I'm getting this information to tell me something kind of interesting about themselves, or just, it can be absolutely anything. I will tell you now, I'm not going to say much more than what they told me. If you have additional questions about their special interests, we're having Q&A at the end of the program. His item of interest is that he has size 17 feet. There you go. Renee is a 4th-year PhD candidate in economics from Sydney, Australia. Of interest, she's lived in 14 different places and never lived anywhere more than 5 years in her life. And this is for a fairly young person. From Global Environmental Health and Energy, the 3rd one down, we have Emily Paktigian, a 4th-year PhD candidate in public policy. Her hometown is Chalfont, Pennsylvania, and she ran in a marathon last November in Raleigh. I think that's fantastic. Graduates Engineering and Researching Microbiomes is being represented today by Alex McCumber, who's a 3rd-year PhD candidate in environmental engineering. His hometown is Ponca City, Oklahoma. And of interest, in the first 6 months of moving to Durham, he got hit by a car 3 times, once while driving and twice while on a bike. Ouch. Next in line, we have Land Conflict and Reforms in Africa, Past, Present, and Future, represented by Olu Lawal. He's a 3rd-year PhD student in neurobiology, working on, hometown, New York, New York. And of interest, he's originally from Nigeria and plays multiple musical instruments. He can tell you which ones they are. I didn't get a breakout of them. And then finally, the last 2 representatives here are from State and Economic Development in Asia. Pang Pang is a 3rd-year PhD candidate in political science. Her hometown is Zhengzhou, China. And of interest, she says she's been eating mock chicken for 12 days now. Interesting. I have no idea what mock chicken is. And then we have Phan Ngoc, who's a 4th-year PhD candidate in political science. His hometown is Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And of interest, he owns 2 scooters, one of which he keeps in his backyard and the other in his kitchen. There you go. And on that, I'm going to turn the presentation over to the first group. Thank you, Luke and Renee.
Hi, thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to talk about our working group today. So we're the Challenges in International Development. Sorry, let me just And so our group is about 10 students, and we're broadly focused in development economics, but we span different areas of economics within economics. So we have people from political economy, industrial organization, global health, education, public economics, and we meet every Friday in the economics department in the Duke lab, the development lab, sorry. And we also have meetings outside of the lab too. And we have discussions about our own research, new methodologies that we could use, that we can share with each other, and then best practices and other kinds of interests that we have within international development. This group is great for us because it helps us to get feedback on our early research ideas, and then to also interact with each other because we have very similar research interests and interests overall, and also to stay informed about new research that's happening in our field and beyond our fields too. So these are the members of our group. We're more than 10 people now, and as you can see, we're from mostly economics, but then also we have an engineering student too. And there's a wide range of years that we come from within the program too. And we have a very interdisciplinary perspective. So there's people who do political economy, health, education, gender, labor, industrial organization, and then discrimination and crime too. And our research also spans several different countries. So Bangladesh, Liberia, Myanmar, Peru, India, and the United States too. So now I'm going to start to talk about the research of some of our group members. So the first thing we're going to talk about, I guess, is Amanda's research. So this is one of our group members. She's a fifth-year PhD candidate, and she's studying the impact of ICE partnerships on reporting of domestic violence in the United States, and specifically in North Carolina. So 287G is a recent law that where local law enforcement partners, they partner with ICE, and through this program, they can detain and question people of interest. And so in North Carolina, certain counties have adopted this law. And so Amanda is studying the impact of this law on female reporting of domestic violence. And she finds that adopting these policies actually reduce domestic violence reporting for Hispanic women. And that Hispanic women are actually afraid to call police over fear of being deported.
I'm going to talk about next is Gabriel's work. So Gabriel is a third-year PhD candidate working primarily in Brazil. So he is looking at the asset growth of elected politicians in Brazil. So in Brazil, they have laws that anyone running for municipal office must disclose their assets when running for office. And then he examines the impact of being elected on asset growth by comparing those within a narrow margin of being elected and defeated. And he finds that being elected increases asset growth by over 1%. And that's some evidence of corruption due to being elected. People some municipal government or municipal council people are able to extort some resources by being elected to office. And then I'll talk about Damien's work. So Damien is looking at time use after natural disasters or large events. So he is particularly examining the sinking of a ferry in 2013 in South Korea. The ferry was primarily transporting students from one school. So he looks at the impact of time use in the city with in which the school is located and then in nearby counties. He finds that those within the city spend more time on leisure and housework, while those in nearby counties spend more time at work. And this is evidence of people shifting their time preferences within the city to spend more time with their families and more time grieving, while those in nearby counties are taking up some of that missed work time in order to increase the amount that they are working. Then I'll talk about Jeremy's work. Jeremy is working on the motherhood wage penalty in Indonesia. So one large explanation for why women make less in most contexts than men do is due to a motherhood wage penalty. Employers punish women for the fact that they may, in the future, become mothers, and therefore it's a very well-studied question in the developing world, and now he's examining it in a context in the developing world. So in the developing world, there's very different working sectors. These working sectors are much more informal. People are self-employed, people are working at streetcar stands, and a lot of people do work, unpaid work in family businesses, things like that. And he finds that hours, wages, and profits, so hours and wages if you're formally employed, profits if you're self-employed or own your own business, all reduce in 3 years after having a child. And then my own work is the public health and behavioral implications of a solid waste intervention. And the context for that is in India, particularly in Tamil Nadu. I'm looking at solid waste disposal is a very large public health hazard in India, and it's a very difficult to deal with issue. So I'm trying to establish a causal link between improper waste disposal and public health, and then to examine two other aspects, to look at the impact of if individuals are exposed to a treatment, encouraging them to properly dispose of their waste. How do untreated individuals behave? Do they take the actions of their neighbors as compliments, and then listen to what their neighbors are doing and also dispose of their waste in a proper way, or do they do it as substitutes and then change their behavior so that they are able to dispose more improperly without anyone noticing? And then I'm examining to see if there are multiple waste disposal equilibriums. So if there's one where a large group of people are improperly disposing, and if social pressure can get it to an area where a lot fewer people are improperly disposing of their waste. And I'm currently applying for funding for that.
Oops. Sorry. And so I'll just talk about my own research now. So I'm studying the socioeconomic trade-offs of in prediction tools that are used in policing and criminal justice. And so one of the tools I'm studying are pretrial recidivism risk assessment tools. So these tools are machine learning prediction tools that predict the recidivism risk that pretrial defendants pose. And so they're used by judges in decision making. And so the question that I study in this context is how these tools actually trade off efficiency and equity considerations. And what I find is that variables like the neighborhoods where defendants live actually explain very little of the outcome variable. So they actually help very little to predict the outcome, which is recidivism. However, they explain a very large portion of the black-white difference in scores. So these variables are not really helping very much, but making certain people much worse off, basically. Yeah, so that's it. That's it for our group. We're very thankful to DUCIGS for the funding that we receive, and it really helps us to talk about our research. So yeah, thanks. Oh, actually, don't have to pass this. Pass this. I have my own.
Okay, hi everyone. I'm Emily Paktigian. I am a PhD candidate at Stanford, as Nancy let you know. And today I'm going to be talking to you about the Global Environmental Health and Energy Working Group. We're a working group, I think we've been around for 4 or 5 years now. This is my second year coordinating the group, and so I of course want to just say thank you to DUCIGS for the funding and for this opportunity to share with you about the work that GIHI has been working on this year. One thing I'll point out is that throughout the presentation you'll see some pictures. These are all pictures taken by various group members during our field work. So most of the members of our group do a lot of work in the field, and so I hope you enjoy the pictures as well. Okay, so to just get into it a little bit on who we are primarily master's and PhD students, although recently we have also begun working with some RAs and also with some postdocs. We represent a variety of departments across campus. We're primarily from the Stanford School of Public Policy and the Nicholas School of the Environment, but we also have group members from Civil and Environmental Engineering, My apologies. I'm an economist and I often write down economics, so a slight typo there on the slide. But the engineering department, as well as some members from the economics department as well. So we have kind of a wide variety of students who are all interested in looking at issues in global health and in energy access. To get into the topics that we study, we tend to study a fairly wide range of topics because global health and energy access are quite large topics. In the global health arena, we primarily study public health and primarily infectious disease and the implications of various household level behaviors, what that means for public health outcomes. Again, primarily in infectious disease related to water and sanitation, related to things like respiratory illness and indoor air pollution, and also malaria. Increasingly, we have also begun studying some non-communicable diseases such as asthma or kind of chronic lung and health conditions, given the relationships between some of those health implications and exposure to air pollution. In addition, we study something that's highly related to environmental health, and that is energy access. So many of you probably know that there is quite a large focus on energy access and energy across Duke's campus in many of the departments represented by our working group, but also more broadly here at Duke. And so many of our working group members study issues in energy such as fuel and cook stove choice, and then also just what types of access there are throughout the developing world, primarily looking at off-grid options for electricity access and the implications of electricity access on development. So we primarily work in developing countries. We have projects throughout Asia, so we have projects throughout China, India, Bangladesh, Cambodia, Indonesia. We have some folks that work in Latin America, in Brazil, in Honduras, and in Haiti. And then we also have some members that look at some of these issues in the United States as well. So just to give you a kind of overview of what we generally do throughout the year, our primary focus is to provide an opportunity and a platform for our group members to present their original research. So often this research is related to people's master's projects, to people's dissertation work. Many of us are working on things outside of our dissertations or our master's projects as well. And so we have the opportunity to present that research to each other as well. In addition to the sharing of our work, of our research, we also really do try to share resources with one another through our listserv at our meetings. So we share, relevant papers in the field, new methods, new research to try to keep everyone up to date about these new things that are happening in the realm of environmental health and energy. We also try to share upcoming events in the Triangle, things like seminars and speakers that are coming to campus or coming to UNC or going to be at RTP. We share calls for conferences, and we also try to share information about on-campus resources like funding sources for conference travel or for small research grants. And I'll also note that many of our working group members have received small grants from DUCIGS, so it's been another nice way that our working group has been able to interact with DUCIGS as well, not only through our working group funding, but also through small grants for travel and research. So that is, of course, much appreciated as well. So some working group outputs. We have had, as I mentioned, since we've been around for about 4 or 5 years, we've had a series of successful project outputs. We've had published papers, we've had successfully completed master's projects, successful dissertation defenses of our members, and that has only kind of widened the reach and scope of our working group because now we have previous members who are professors and who are in industry, and so we kind of maintain that network as well. We also really have, I think, helped a lot of students in preparing for other types of presentations, so preparing for conference presentations, preparing for the job market. Our group is an easy way to kind of have some presentation experience that doesn't require too much. I mean, people prepare, but it doesn't require too much concern, and it's a nice way to practice for other events. So again, I just wanted to say thank you to DUCIGS and for this opportunity to share a little bit about our working group, and I'd be happy to discuss our group further if anyone has questions at the end.
Hi, I'm Alex McCumber, the one that's been hit by a car several times. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm part of GERM, which is Graduates Engineering and Researching Microbiomes. I cannot take credit for that fantastic acronym, but I decided to keep it. We've been around for about 3 years now. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, what is the microbiome? One definition that's commonly used is just the total of the microorganisms of a particular environment. And I'm sure you're thinking, but like, what does that really mean? So basically, the microbiome can, before we had the ability to sequence and identify a bunch of bacterial species, before we would be plating things and looking at bacteria kind of on a one-on-one, or maybe at maximum 10 or 20 species at a time. But as technology has advanced, we've been able to take a sample of something, maybe your gut, take a swab of your skin. There's even environmental engineers that do things with soil and water. We can take that sample, we can isolate all of the DNA out of that sample. We can sequence it, get those lines of DNA, and then match them to a database to tell us all the bacterial species that are actually in there. In one of the most recent analyses that I've done, actually last night, the soil sample that I processed identified 30,000 different bacteria. So you can imagine that this is kind of that forefront into the big data that you've been hearing about a lot. And with that has come a lot of complications in why GERM exists here on campus. So the different microbiomes that I had previously mentioned, I have a few pictures behind me, and these are some common areas of research, not only here on campus, but also just in the Greater Triangle area. There's the top right photo is from AgBiome. That's a company here in the Triangle that does research identifying what bacterial species work well with different plants in soil to help improve crop yields and crop growth. And so to meet that demand of a growing world population, they're doing important work to try and help alleviate the burden, the upcoming burden. There's a lot of people here on campus that do work with the gut, and that's a really, really popular topic. I'm sure maybe some of you have heard of that, but you can actually submit your own samples and see what your own gut microbiome looks like, because they have an understanding of what a healthy gut microbiome looks like. One of the people that I work with is John Rawls. He's from MGM. And he is looking at the impacts of starvation, long-term starvation, and then refeeding. And so what he's looking at is during that starvation period, what's going on with the immune system and why are we so much more susceptible to disease? And then when we start that refeeding process, are we doing refeeding in the right way? Are we able to get that gut back to its healthy state, or do we need to introduce probiotics? Such that it will actually enhance the weight gain and the health of the person who's gone through that starvation period. Another person is Billy Gerard. He was actually in charge and who came up with the acronym before me. He was looking at the implications of ballast water transfer from different ports throughout the world. In the 1990s, there was a big cholera outbreak in Peru, killed thousands of people, and it was all because somebody picked up ballast water from one port, shipped it to another port in Peru, dropped it off. Cholera was introduced into a place where it had never been seen before, and it killed several thousand people. Since then, there's been regulation that tries to treat ballast water. But one great thing that Billy has done is gone around and looked at open ocean samples and then these port water samples from around the world. And he's able to kind of build a new algorithm that before they were only testing for salinity to make sure that they had treated the water, but now we can actually sequence what's in the microorganisms that are in that ballast water, and we can have a better predictive tool on if they're actually treating it or not. So that's some of the work that is done here on campus and has been done by a lot of people. We have about 20 people that participate in our usually about weekly meetings. And you can tell that because the microbiome space has grown in such popularity, a lot of different fields are getting their hands in on it too. So we have the people that help us with best practices, and that's usually the biologists, because I'm an engineer and I don't know what I'm doing down there. And then we have the engineers that when the biologists say, wow, I have 30,000, I have 30,000 bacterial species identified. What are some algorithms that I can do to kind of reduce the dimensionality of this data so that I can better analyze it? And then we also have statisticians that tell me that everything that I'm doing is incorrect. And then we also have some ecologists that actually is kind of where the field has gone to for data analysis, because we're looking at these basically ecosystems, and the metrics that we're using now, we're borrowing from ecology, and to try and help us figure out, like, how do we analyze these large data sets. So the goal of our student working group, I'll read what's on the slide. Create a multidisciplinary group to share ideas and methods to enhance the understanding and quality of microbiome research here on Duke's campus. And so, like I've previously mentioned several times, I'll tell my own personal story. The first time I went and talked to a collaborator, and he said, hey, run this analysis. And I said, okay. But then actually I had no idea what he had said, but I wrote it down. So then I was able to go to GERM and talk to some of my peers and better talk through what that analysis was and what that meant, and kind of be able to have a better understanding of what I've actually been doing. Because the space has only been, this microbiome has only been around for about 10 years. So it's really a very, very brand new field. So we've done quite a few events from this semester, and including last semester. We have a lot of visiting speakers from industry and academia, and so that's really good for us, because we're not going to all be academics once we graduate. So this gives us a moment that we can meet with those people who work in a non-academic setting and kind of figure out, hey, even looking towards future careers, what do we need to be preparing ourselves for? How can we better make ourselves employable in the future? Academics, we have people from NCA&T and here on campus come and speak about what they're doing, and that's really interesting. We also do our own research presentations. The most recent was Billy Gerard again, and he successfully defended his dissertation last Thursday, and so I've learned a lot about his research these last few years, and I think that the questions that we get through these research presentations helps us enhance what we're doing. So this whole time he had been speaking several times throughout the last few years, and I think his dissertation was better than it would have been without GERM. And then we also do method sharing, because a lot of us are coming into different spaces from different places where we don't really know what we're doing, especially with this big data. And that's been really helpful to learn what a random forest model is, or to learn what ordination plots are, and how we can use those things to better analyze our own data. So one thing I'm going to say that DUCIGS really helps us with is we usually use what's been given to us to provide food for whenever visiting speakers come. And before we did that, we weren't getting a lot of interaction between our visiting speakers and our students. And so now we allow for the visiting speaker to speak, and then we bring in the food. And that creates a really comfortable setting, a really non-formal setting for those students and the academic or the industry speaker to come and speak. And that's been really great. I really think that a lot of these students have made great networking connections, and that I think one or two internships have even come out of this, this kind of informal setting. So it's been really great for us. And so to end, I want to say thank you for having me, and thank you for everything that you guys have done for us.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Oluwadamilola. That's quite a mouthful, so please feel free to call me Olu. And first of all, I want to thank you for the delicious meal. They do say way to a man's heart is through his stomach, and my heart is really happy right now. Uh, so, uh, yes, so I am the president of, as Nancy mentioned earlier, I'm a PhD student in neurobiology. But I'm also the president of the Duke African Graduate and Professional Student Association. And our working group topic for this year is land conflicts in Africa. And land conflicts in Africa, past, present, and future. And before I continue, I just want to thank the Center for International and Global Studies for providing the funding for us to be able to do this working group. Without them, in addition to Duke Africa Initiative, we would not be able to do this working group. So thank you very much. And also thank you for inviting me here to talk to you about what we've been doing in the past in this academic year. So one of the things that we noticed in our organization was that there was a lot of land conflicts all over the continent of Africa. I don't know if you guys have been paying attention to the news. You probably heard about land conflicts, for example, in South Africa and Zimbabwe, pretty much all over the continent. And so our working group, the goals of our working group first is to educate. So the first thing is to educate because a lot of people don't even know that some of these things are happening. Even not only people in the United States or different parts of the world, even fellow Africans might not be aware that some of these land conflicts are occurring on the continent. And so the first is to have someone come in and educate us about these particular land conflicts. And then the second aspect of the working group is then to have a discussion that highlights some of the things that were talked about in the presentation, and also to think about what would be a potential solutions to some of these land conflicts. So as an example, here have one of the posters that we put up. So this is one of the topics that we dealt with, land conflicts in Africa, Nigerian herdsmen. So for example, I don't know if you guys have heard about the news. There was a lot of killing violence that occurred, especially in the state of in Benue State in Nigeria, which is between the Fulani herdsmen who were actually all over the continent of Africa, but they do migrate from the north of Nigeria into more of the middle belt of Nigeria into a state such as Benue State. And the one of the things we talk about was that there are different narratives. So depending on what narrative you heard about some of these conflicts will drive what your assumptions are. It's going to drive what your potential solution or suggested solutions to the problems are. So this is just highlighting one of the examples of a topic that we talk about. So the format is we have different topics. This is just one of the topics. Here I've highlighted some of the other topics, for example, in conflict in Ethiopia, and also land conflicts in Zimbabwe. So here you can see we have Papa Kwajo, who's talking to us about land conflicts in Zimbabwe. We have Carl Kidan here, who's talking to us about land grabbing in Ethiopia. So the format is we have someone, like I said, first educate us on the topic, and then afterwards we have a discussion. And so pretty much what we get from this, first of all, like I said, is the education. So for example, up until before this working group, I did not know that Ethiopia, for example, there is no private ownership of land. That land was mostly owned by the state, and the state can either give licensed people or lease the land to people, which they can use for a certain amount of time. And there's also different ways in which land can be acquired. So, for example, some farmers don't necessarily have to lease the land; they can just use the land. But the state can come and say, "Hey, now we're going to take away this land from you and give it to, for example, an outside investor." So there was a lot of knowledge that I think I acquired as well as other students. And what's great about our group is that our group has members from all different schools. at Duke University. So from the School of Medicine, which I'm part of, we have people from Sanford, we have people from Fuqua, we have people from pretty much all over the map. So the different aspect of how some of these land conflicts can affect, either it's the economic situations of those people or the social fabric of that society due to this conflict. So we're able to talk about all these different things and then be able to come up with some of the themes that emerge between all these different conflicts. So, for example, one of the things that comes up is the role of other countries, not just even African countries, but Western countries in some of these conflicts. So, for example, in Zimbabwe, we have, during the era of colonialism, we have people who came in and settled there, and now some of them now have ownership of some of these lands. Today, there is the claim that these lands were acquired through illegitimate means, and therefore that the land should be returned to the people who owned this land, hundreds of years ago. And then there's the conflict of some of these people have been living here in Zimbabwe for a long time that they're not considered Zimbabwe. That is it fair to take land from these people and then give it to other Zimbabweans? So these are some of the things that we talk about. For example, in the Fulani herdsmen topic that we dealt with. One of the narrative is that it's due to global warming. The idea is that these Fulani herdsmen, they need land to be able to take care of their cattle. And so in the north, where you have a lot of desert, during during the dry season, there's not a lot of vegetation for their cattle. So they move more towards the middle belt where there will be vegetations for their cattle. And so then that creates a conflict between those that are already living in those regions, and then that leads to violence. So if we say that, okay, this is due to global warming because these people are having these dry seasons becoming worse and worse. And we agree that this is due to that a significant portion of the climate change is due to human activity. And therefore that, the industrial world, if contributed significantly to global warming, then should the industrial world, have something to do when it comes to these global crises that are occurring as a result of climate change. So these are the things that we kind of talk about in terms of what are the common themes here, and how do these things relate to each other in terms of the land conflicts that's everywhere. And one thing that's very fascinating in terms of land is that it's one of the resources that harbors other resources. So your land impacts your shelter, other mineral resources, your food. So pretty much having land is pretty much can be a make or break for a community. Can decide whether they continue to grow, or it can decide whether they're eradicated. So this is pretty much some of the things that we're talking about. So our group is a little different, that we're not as research oriented, but we're more in terms of educating people about some of these topics in Africa, and then having a discussion where people can talk about either their personal relationship to these land conflicts. So for example, I had, during one of the discussions, we had someone who was actually from Sierra Leone, and he's actually his ethnic group is a Fulani ethnic group, and he was able to speak personally to that. While a good amount of Fulanese are herdsmen, there's still a good amount of Fulanese that are not herdsmen. They're also thrive in terms of cultivation of land. And so and sometimes we don't think about these things because sometimes people will cast some of these Fulani herdsmen as being, not educated and being pastoral, but having someone there who's also going to school here to talk about that we're not just a monolith, that we are. So I think that's one of the things that's great about our topic and working group. So once more, I just want to thank you guys for inviting me to talk about the topic, and I hope we continue to get funding in the future. And thank you very much.
Why is this? Can I go back to the first slide? It keeps on playing.
Can you go back to the first slide, please?
This is playing automatically, isn't it? Right, is it? Hi everyone, my name is Pom Pom. I'm a third-year PhD student in political science, and I'm originally from China. I guess my parents are just lazy when they were trying to give me a name, so they couldn't really think of a proper name. Um, yeah, so they sort of copy pasted my surname. But anyway, I'm here to talk about our working group, State Capacity and Economic Development in Asia. We are a very young group, probably the youngest working group here. So first of all, I would like to thank Duke University Center for International and Global Studies for giving us the funding. We're really appreciative of that because most of the participants in our group are either second years or third years who are transitioning between taking classes to becoming independent researchers. So this platform really gives us the opportunity to sit down and walk through the puzzles that we have in mind without fearing being judged by the faculties. So we're really appreciative of that. And to start a topic, I want to talk about the motivation for starting this group. The two of us one day sit down and feeling a little bit unhappy with the existing literature in political science and also economics on development. We think a lot of the things they talk about is primarily about electoral institutions. But coming from Asia, we have this sort of first-hand experiences dealing with bureaucracies. And we think bureaucracy and state apparatus is an important variable that changes preferences into actual outputs like public goods that are provided to the public. So this is why we started this group in the first place, by hoping to add to the current literature in political science. And here's the outline of our talk today. We will talk a little bit about who we are and then what we have done in the past year, and also fleshing out a little bit on what we hope to do in the future. So first of all, who we are. Primarily right now, we are a group of political science students who share the interests in state development and economic development. But the geographical focus is not necessarily in China because we have some Latin American students who are also participating in our working group. And we come from different countries like Japan, Vietnam, Poland, Guatemala, and China. That's me. Most of us are doing either dissertations or prospectus related to the topic. Here's a picture of some of us. Yeah, I was also there with messy hair. And Fan would talk about the substantives of what we have done in the past year.
Okay, so I want to talk about the goal, the mix of this working group. So state capacity is like it's a very kind of vague concept. So this is what happened when you're here. It's very easy, right? When you want to do something with your vehicle, you go to the DMV or you call the police, they're going to be there. But this is not actually true in developing countries. So a lot of times, like when you need to do something, you need to get electricity. Maybe it's not the state that you're going to the local village head who is going to have some connection with the state, for example. Or if you call the police, maybe no one will come. And when they come to try to get back your like stolen bicycle or something, they want money, like half of the value of the bike, before they can give it back to you. So all these things are what the state provide to the citizens, and they are called state capacity. And this vary very widely across Asia, which is a huge continent. And also this concept of state capacity also has like very tight connection with economic development. So one thing that we do when we study our own countries is that we do not really know about the context in other countries. And the goal of our working group is for students to come together and describe and talk about the history of state capacity development in each countries, and essentially so that they can compare and contrast the differences between these country contexts. And from that, we will get comparative research ideas. And the final goal is to have students with their own research and to have students like strike connection between each other to have co-author research. So the format of our group is that we meet every other week on Tuesday at 6 p.m. At Gross 1222 The topics that we have covered this semester, as you can see here, is that last semester at the end we have a section on state capacity in Japan, and then this semester we have had talks on state capacity in Latin America, the research into state capitalism, state-owned enterprises around the world, and the development of state capacity in Latin America. And next week we are going to have a talk on this. Oh, that's week 29. Yeah, not 19. That's a typo. So we are going to have a talk on corruption and how that affects the capacity. So the format is the speakers going to give a presentation that looks like this. This is taken from one of our members' presentation on Japan. And then we are going to have a Q&A section and sections where students just talk about their concerns and how that differs from what they already know about the capacity. And we are trying to plan something big at the end of the year. So our regular meeting, we are just going to talk about country context. But at the end of the year, in early May, we are planning to have a big event where we are going to have 4 students presenting their own research. And in this meeting, the goal is to help these students develop and get out the research for publication. And then we're going to invite 1 or 2 faculty professors to come and give feedback for the students on this research. And after that, we're going to have, we're going to go out and have sit down dinner where we, essentially cap off a successful year. So.
Since we are a very young group, so we haven't really actually presented any finished paper yet. But one example of the collaborative potential is, for example, the research project that Mia and Fan have been thinking about. So my geographical focus is mostly on China, and he's mostly doing research on Vietnam. I think there are a lot of similarities between these 2 countries, but people really haven't taken the similarities very seriously. So we're trying to put them into comparative perspective by looking at how bureaucracies work in these 2 different countries and how legislatures work in these 2 different countries and how those institutions affect public goods that are provided. To look into the future, we have a few points in mind, but listening from the experiences of other working groups, I also have some new thoughts on this. We're hoping to reach out to more students from other departments like economics, maybe environmental science, and etc. Because right now we're just primarily political science students. We would want to diversify. And we also would like to receive advice on how to do that in the most efficient way. Second, I think we might start a mailing list and send out like interesting events and funding opportunities to our members, as people have suggested before. And also maybe we can do some non-academic events to really increase the bounding opportunities within our group. And last but not the least, we would want to invite more guest speakers. Maybe we can get help from Duke University Center for International Global Studies and Asia Initiative, APSI, these institutions. So these are the things that we have in mind. If you have other suggestions, please let us know. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was interesting and fun and informative. If anybody here has questions for any of the speakers, their names are in front of them. You can direct your questions to them specifically, and please wait until I bring the microphone so that so your question will be recorded with the session today. Anybody? Okay, one moment.
So is it Renee? Yeah. So with your research project, have you found that any of the predictive items are actually true, or all of them basically end up socially bound?
Sorry, I don't understand.
So for your research topic, the predictive questions that they look during pretrial, have you found that any are actually valid that they're looking at? Because you talked about one that wasn't.
So the tool that I'm looking at, it predicts recidivism. So do you mean valid in the sense that?
The topics that they talked about, like you specifically talked about their neighborhood and how that's not a good indicator. So have you found any that
Yeah, so variables like criminal history are predictive of whether someone is likely to commit a crime again. And neighborhoods are also, they also have predictive power, which is probably why they're included in these kinds of models. Um, the yeah, so there's definitely these kinds of models are used for a reason because they do predict recidivism quite well, and also increasingly these kinds of tools are using more complex systems. So like things like machine learning systems to predict even better. So yeah. Thanks for your question.
Any additional questions for our speakers? Yes, ma'am.
I have a follow-up question. I think when you were describing it, I think you said that there were some variables that, like, when you look at it alongside race, that you find race to be more predictive. I think that's what you said. I could be falsely summarizing. But you said, I think you used the term black-white binary or something like that. Could you explain that more, what the tracking is?
Yeah. So these models don't. So it's a bit unclear, but most of these companies will say that they don't use variables like protected classes like race. So because race is a protected class, most companies don't say that they don't use race, and it's so it's a bit unclear whether it's some legal scholars will say that using race is illegal, and so although they can't use race, they can use variables that are highly correlated with race. So specifically, I'm not looking at the impact of race because so this company says that they don't use race. So I'm looking at variables like defendant neighborhoods, which is because the area where defendants could live could be highly correlated with their race. And I'm finding that these kinds of variables, they don't really help to predict that much compared to how much worse they make certain defendants. So variables like defendant neighborhoods, they increase the overall predictive power of the system very little, but then they explain a very large portion of the average black-white gap in scores. So it's making certain people much worse off at the cost of So it's a small gain in predictive power at the cost of making certain people much worse off in terms of their scores, and then the scores that people get can lead to differences in case outcomes. So if someone gets a higher score, they may be more likely to spend longer time incarcerated pre-trial, and then this can lead to further economic disparities. So yeah, there could be long-term implications of having a higher score.
Hello. Rana, I have 10 questions. No, I'm joking. I'll give you a break. I actually have just one simple question to Alex. Alex, you mentioned that you were able to connect with alumni and other businesses, etc., to place your members on internships. So I was wondering if you could maybe share it with us and with other groups, what has worked so that those working groups have also can help you later on with those practical challenges such as getting a job, internship, etc. What has worked with you, and what have you considered that, but have not tried and would like to do in futures to help your group members?
Yeah. So if I'm honest, I'm one of those people that got an internship through the connection, but that may be through my own personal just not having much of a filter and asking if they are taking on interns. But part of that can be, when I'll first start by how we identify guest speakers to come, and that's just through the power of Google and finding those companies that employ bioinformaticians, those keywords where people within our group would want to find themselves employed in the future. And so there's plenty of those companies here in the Triangle. For us, I don't know how that would work for the other groups. So that's how we identify visiting speakers, and just emailing. We do a lot of cold calling, but also using connections that, Duke is very well connected with those people in RTP as well. And so whenever I can talk to John Rawls or Lawrence David, some of these big heavy hitters in this microbiome space that work here on campus, I can say, who are your contacts and can you put me in connection with them? And that works a lot better to get them to actually come. And then I guess one thing that I should be doing is, I was able to get an internship out of this, and probably talking to my peers about, hey, what's worked is having not them eat while the speaker's there, and then, or while the speaker's speaking, and then they just leave afterwards. By saving that food for after the speaker is finished, we actually, I think, create a space for there to be conversation afterwards. And it's a little more informal, so it's not like I have to sit in a room with 40 people and raise my hand and kind of be embarrassed about maybe what I'm asking isn't an adequate question. And some people do feel that way, but this gives them a really good ability to speak in that informal setting and one-on-one. And I think what I should probably do in the future is talk to the peers and be like, hey, this worked for me. Like, don't be ashamed to ask, like, hey, are you guys hiring for interns? What are ways that I should find myself, or be working on now to find myself better employable in the future? But those are some of the things that we've used. I can't take credit for all of them. Billy, he was in charge before me, and he kind of did a great job of setting this all up, and I just get to take over.